Attitude Era. Well, you kids probably know the story of Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, mainly because he's one of the biggest box office draws in the world, and probably one of the biggest and best talkers in all of the business and in the squared circle. But in the pantheon of professional wrestling, it is arguable, to date, merchandise sold and tickets, this man, Stone Cold Steve Austin, was the greatest pro wrestling draw of all time. You talk about a guy that could work, a guy that could talk, a guy that people love. It was no stretch of the imagination that once WWE Films had come together, that they were going to do some films with Stone Cold. He had had a turn and reoccurring guest host kind of thing going on with Nash Bridges, the Don Johnson show that went on forever. I think because old people fell asleep and forgot that it was on, and that stoners hoped that Cheech Marin would smoke a joint. That never happened. At least I don't think so. Stone Cold had so many projects in development. He was white hot. They were looking for the perfect vehicle. Now, when WWE Films finally came about, it seemed that the time was right to make Stone Cold a star. So what did we get? The Condemned. How much did I get The Condemned for? Well, don't fall off your seat, but $6 at Mr. Cheapo's Records. Now, for $6, this is a damn good deal. Still one of my favorite WWE movies that they've done to date. It's a very simple setup. Austin plays a guy named Jack Conrad. Maybe he's a soldier of fortune, but we know that he has a military background. And he is one bad motherfucker. That is all we know. So they do this reality show, and essentially at this time the show Survivor was at its height. Now this was kind of like Survivor, where a bunch of these people were going to kill each other on a live internet feed, and basically they were going to buy their freedom. They were all kind of criminals, convicts, soldiers of fortune, mercenaries, whatever you want to call them. It's very similar to The Running Man, except it wasn't in the future. It was present day. The reason this film works is because you've got Austin, and not enough of Austin, but they put him in the right role with Jack Conrad. Steve Austin, I feel, always had kind of rugged good looks. Reminded me more of a rough around the edges Steve McQueen. Obviously a man's man. His personality transcends. He doesn't really need to play a character. He just needs to be Steve Austin. And I think that is where they succeeded with The Condemned. Now, rest in peace Roddy Piper. The greatest line ever written or ever spoken was an ad-lib. I came here to chew bubblegum and kick ass, and I'm all out of bubblegum. But in my heart, a close second line would be when one of the producers asks Stone Cold where he's from, and he says, little town north of Anchorage, Alaska. Well, fuck your mama. And that set the tone. See, we were entering the PG era of WWE, and Austin was injured. He wasn't going to wrestle anymore, especially after his trilogy-ending match with The Rock. So you had WWE Films doing The Marine. And The Marine was good, but it was pretty much just a low-rent version of Commando. I mean, down to the cheesy Titanic synth music and Robert Patrick as the villain. I got nothing against Robert Patrick. I mean, he's amazing as a D-1000, and in certain roles he does do his thing, but generally he's just a shitty villain. But I digress. Stone Cold Steve Austin is forced to fight for his life, and in The Condemned, this works. I mean, there's some fine-tuning that should have been done, but this was one of those deals where WWE felt that they screwed up because they put him in an R-rated movie, whereas they would learn their lesson and say, well, we got to put John Cena in a PG-13 movie. I don't always agree with that. I think you got to let a guy be himself. And I think that this was a perfect transition from the squared circle to the screen, because we all knew that he was a foul-mouthed redneck, and we all wanted to hear him drop F-bombs and all that other good stuff. And now on the silver screen, we were finally able to see the stone cold, ass-kicking, doesn't take names, doesn't take prisoners, just kills people and handles his business. And I think that's why this film works, is because it's a hard R. It wasn't a very big box office success. It wasn't well received. Unfortunately, people kind of discovered it on home video, and they loved it. I feel Austin never really got the chance. I think it was politics, the wrong scripts. Essentially, The Marine was written for Stone Cold Steve Austin, and for one reason or another, his agent told him to pass on it. It's amazing, if you go on to IMDb and you look up Stone Cold Steve Austin, there are so many movies that he was going to do that he passed on for one reason or another. I don't think he has a vested interest in being a movie star. He has become one of the most prolific voices in the industry. He does the podcast, and now the WWE Network has adopted the podcast and turned that into a live format where you can watch it, most recently with Edge and Christian. Everybody this fall is awaiting the Stone Cold Steve Austin 2-part interview with The Undertaker, because very rarely have they lifted the veil of The Undertaker, and it's going to be very interesting to see these guys who are friends finally, shoot the shit and talk about the business, talk about their experiences. And I think that's probably one of the most exciting things that's coming up for Stone Cold Steve Austin fans. Austin came out around the time in the Attitude Era when characters were shades of gray. They weren't, per se baby faces or heels. They were kind of in the middle. And Austin is the greatest example of a shades of gray anti-hero. Now, I think in better hands, the guy who directed this is named Scott Wiper. That's a shitty name, and that was a shitty joke. But it's one of those things, I think, with a better director, they probably could have done more with Austin's character. Essentially, in this movie, he's like a cog keeping the movie going. It's almost like he's a MacGuffin in his own film. And I think they did that purposely to hide his lack of acting chops. And I think that was a mistake. He became kind of a second banana to his own movie. And that's where the producers and I think everybody involved made a mistake with The Condemned. He's a movie star. And he's not as diverse or as charismatic, or perhaps for a big audience, but for a man's man, this is the kind of guy that should have had a huge film career. I mean, if you watch The Condemned, it's a solid, dirty little nasty flick. It works. It's got good kills, good fight scenes. Again, that line is gold. There's a couple of lines that Austin drops that are just, really funny and charismatic. I think that he got overshadowed by Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. I also think that Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson could probably open a picture because he's an anomaly. I mean, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson is like Neo in the Matrix. He's 1 in a billion. He shouldn't have happened, but he did, and we're all thankful for it. However, because of his gigantic star, which is almost like the sun, Austin would play the moon and just be completely eclipsed out. And that's sad because they've sold him short. He's been in a bunch of films, and some of them are good and some of them are really bad. If you want to see a really bad one, you need to see The Stranger. Whoa, dear God, is that just a trashy film? He most recently had done a film with Dolph Lundgren called The Package, and he worked pretty well in that one. He did a film called Hunt to Kill, which was basically the redneck version of Taken, and that was actually pretty good and cheesy in the right ways. I think the problem with Austin, though, is that he can only play one character, and that's Stone Cold Steve Austin. We can't really fault him for that, but he never found his calling or perhaps the right vehicle. In the Austin McMahon era, he represented the working class to McMahon's 1%. I mean, today I had a shitty day at work, and I really wouldn't have minded throwing a beating to my boss. I mean, shit knows I could break him in half like a fucking twig, but I can't. And that's the good thing about Stone Cold Steve Austin. All those ass whoopings and stunners that he gave to the Stooges, or that he gave to Sergeant Slaughter. Poor Sergeant Slaughter. He's just like, I feel like there was that whole point in the Attitude Era, Sergeant Slaughter just getting his ass whooped by everybody. But that was what Stone Cold Steve Austin represented. The blue collar, of course, and the fantasy fulfillment. That you could be the poor working schmo and you could rise up against your boss, the powers that be, the 1%, and just flip them the bird and tell them to go fuck themselves, eat a dick, throw them a stunner, and drink a beer. It's one of those things, I don't know what the legacy of Stone Cold Steve Austin will be on film. Again, because his filmography is so scarce and there really isn't a lot there. It's a shame. I wish we could have seen more of that Bionic Redneck. In fact, if they were going to remake or reboot They Live, it's sad to say, not that I want this to happen and it should never happen, but Stone Cold would have been a perfect guy to play that Roddy Piper character. But again, Hollywood, don't get any ideas because I told you about this. Fuck. Because everything that we say on Blu-ray on a budget comes true. So I guess at any moment they'll be remaking They Live about now.
Blu-ray on a budget.